Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so Saagar Enjeti of Breaking Points did an interview with Joe Kent. This is the person who was working underneath Tulsi Gabbard in intelligence in the administration and resigned with a letter of resignation saying that he opposed going to the Iran war and this isn't what he wanted to be a part of the Trump administration for, etc., unconscionable, and also blaming it on Israel, saying Israel got us into this and essentially making the case for that. So that's been going around. It's been doing the rounds. Tucker Carlson did an interview with this guy. It's definitely sending some ripples through the base in terms of, you know, this conversation happening about the MAGA coalition, certain members of it being anti-war. So it's up for debate about how much the base is actually behind him, because you have some really one-sided polls showing that he has like 100%, 90% of the support of the base. Seeing 100% makes me skeptical and makes me wonder if there's something weird going on with the polls behind the scenes. But regardless, this guy, Joe Kent, is kind of at the center of this conversation right now. So he and Saagar talked about this. Saagar has been admitting he was wrong about Trump, saying that he is humiliated and that, you know, he is so beyond, this is the biggest disappointment of his professional career, etc. So I appreciate that. That's about the only routine that I want to hear from any of these guys that pushed Trump, especially on the basis of him being anti-war. So this Joe Kent thing is interesting because this is a guy who ran for office before on an America First platform. He actually kind of had the support of Nick Fuentes for a moment and then ended up having to disavow that because he actually wanted to win. He did not win. And then, like I said, he ended up under Tulsi Gabbard. But the main thing I wanted to highlight is some interesting things he said about Trump, about Charlie Kirk, that I think show the trajectory that this guy sees for himself, and definitely shows why we should not fully view him as like an altruistic truth teller. Clearly, this guy is angling. So check that out real quick.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this imminent threat. So that's another thing I've seen leveled against you. Imminent threat. Only the president. Mac, we can put Director Gabbard's statement up there on the screen. She said that the ODNI and I guess the office you used to work for, your job was really just to assess the intelligence. The only person who can determine what is and not an imminent threat is the president. Do you believe that statement? Do you think that statement? Because clearly you're saying that there was no imminent threat, and I'm assuming you had access to the same level of intelligence.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why I had to resign. I think this is, I believe the DNI is speaking the truth. At the end of the day, the president was elected by the American people. So if the president wants to say, like, my tolerance for imminent is anybody pointing a weapon generally in our direction, well, okay, you're the boss, you're the commander in chief. I don't agree with that, and I had to resign because basically, if that's the bar that we're going to have, then we're going to need to start a lot more wars with a lot more countries.
Much of the meta narrative here is about how the Israelis manipulated Trump. But isn't Trump responsible? Like, he's the commander in chief. He chose to believe it. He could have called you if he wanted to. He could have called Gabbard. He could have listened to any of these people. He ultimately chose not to. Do you feel like you're stripping a little bit of agency away from the president by, I wouldn't say laying all the blame on the Israelis, but a lot of the blame on the Israelis?
I think we'll have plenty of time for that later on. I think right now we're in a crisis. And what I want the president to know is that right now, I mean, probably for the next, hopefully 2 weeks, but maybe even less time, he has time to turn this thing around. So that's the most important thing to me. That's the most important message I want to get out. At the end of the day, he is the commander in chief and he understands that. And that's why I think for him to truly capture all of his power back and for him to actually govern based on the mandate that 77 million people gave him, I think if he reflects right now on the way that this whole debacle happened and we got into the state that we're in right now with the Straits of Hormuz in peril and the price of energy and no end in sight, I think the main focus has to be on getting him to change course. So
I
guess we'll have this conversation again later to say, who deserves blame later on. But right now, my focus is on hopefully getting him the space to change his mind. You've given me credit for being very gracious to President Trump, and I am. And I think President Trump has a lot of agency, and I think he can turn this around. We got on this topic on Tucker's program because he said, like, we know Trump is a smart guy. Why did he let this happen? And I said, there's two schools of thought. One is the most likely, which is what I outlined basically in my letter and what we've been talking about up to this point. The second is, if you just take a look at the totality of things that could influence President Trump's decision-making, you have the assassination attempt in Butler, that in theory, the assassination attempt in Butler is not linked, according to the official narrative, to what took place with Asif Merchant, who was hired by the Iranians to come to America, hire a sniper, arrested 2 days prior to Butler. That case is shut. We're not allowed to ask any questions or see if there's any linkage between him and Crooks. We were told that Crooks was just a lone gunman, no online presence. We attempted to look into that too. And essentially we're blocked by the FBI, and I know Dan Bongino disputes that. However, Tucker Carlson himself, his own investigative reporters, dug up the fact that Thomas Crooks did indeed have an online persona. And so all I'm saying is, like, we need to run that down because those are potential foreign links as well. As a matter of fact, Tucker's investigative journalists found some of those. So Trump's life was threatened a few different times before he even took office, in a very real way, obviously the most real way in Butler. And there's lots of unanswered questions there. And then there's multiple breaches of President Trump's security perimeter. And then we have what happened with Charlie. And Charlie was vocal against the 12-day war. He was vocal against Midnight Hammer. He eventually got on board because he supported the president. But in the lead up to Midnight Hammer, Charlie was in the Oval Office. And Brett Weinstein's confirmed this with text messages. Others have as well. People can say that, Charlie and I didn't talk, but like I said on Tucker the last time I saw him, and I can't pretend to be close with Charlie. I didn't have any text messages from him, but he saw me in the hallway and we spoke a lot during the transition. He just said, stop us from getting into war with Iran. And he was there to lobby the president for that. And then after Midnight Hammer, a lot of us in the more restrained camp said the Israelis are going to come back to us and ask us to do this again. And Charlie was aware of that as well. Then Charlie is killed in September. Again, same thing. Are there links? Is there more leads to run down? All of that is stopped. And here we are with a nice clean narrative that we're really kind of yelled at for questioning, which I don't fully understand. And so if you take all those things, in totality, and I think one of President Trump's strong suits is he can take in large sets of information and he can come up with what the leverage points are, what the vulnerabilities are, and what his interest is. And so whether or not there is some grand conspiracy or not, there is a potential that he views all of that as a deciding factor. Again, that's not my number one theory of the case, but for some people who are saying, like, President Trump is too stupid or too smart to fall for all of this, and I don't think he necessarily fell for it. I just think with the ecosystem that was created, I think he was heavily influenced. Okay. The alternative course of action is that he is under some degree of coercion. And so that's what Tucker and I were discussing there.
All right. So this guy says some interesting things, and there are genuinely some things that he is putting out there that I think are interesting, that are good for the discourse when it comes to this subject. Talking about how Israel sort of runs influence campaigns from within the government because a lot of our intelligence from that region is dependent on Israel and Mossad. So that gives them leverage in these situations where they can kind of control the flow of information to the United States. And essentially what Joe Kent is saying is that they'll try different things out. They will throw a bunch of narratives out there to try to see what sticks, what gathers interest within an administration with a certain president like Trump, and use that to try to leverage their way into their stated goals, which is war and regime change in Iran. So I think that's a very clear-headed way of looking at what's going on there, and you can definitely see that with Democrats as well, where they seem also influenced by these narratives from within the government about Iran, their nuclear capabilities, what they're doing. They're being so deceptive about their nuclear capabilities, especially right after the initial strikes in this iteration of this war. You kind of immediately had Democrats like Chuck Schumer coming out and saying, like, well, it's pretty crazy what's going on over there. Those guys are, don't get me wrong, those guys are crazy. You were seeing a lot of statements like that from Democrats. And all of that is to obscure the fact that this was an unprovoked attack on our part. And so, but with these little details of information that get blown out of proportion and also stacked together to create a narrative. And, let's be real about this. There's nothing anti-Semitic or tropey or conspiratorial about at least entertaining that concept, specifically because we depend on Mossad when it comes to intelligence for that region. And so if you just acknowledge that reality, and you also acknowledge that Israel is moving with a fair amount of aggression when it comes to what they want to do on the world stage, it's pretty clear to see from the hints and the clues that we have as the public that there is some kind of influence campaign going on behind the scenes to make this outcome happen. Clearly, Israel is benefiting from this more than we are. They're getting what they want more than we are. And that's kind of the nature of the game here. So fleshing that out a little bit is good, even though if we may not really be seeing the details of this. And you can see this guy's tying it in with this sort of like complimentary, this flattery of Trump. So he's going about this media tour, at least from what he's saying, with the intention of reaching Trump, having him be heard. Now, I don't know why you would go on the Breaking Points program if you want to reach Trump. I guess they probably wouldn't have him on Fox News. Maybe they would. I know, like I said, he went on Tucker Carlson, so that has a much better chance of reaching Trump. It seems to me that this guy is a little bit more self-interested than that. I believe that he thought that there was a really good case to leave the government over this Iran stuff. I believe that he has been in the war machine before. He talks about that, and he talks about how what he's seeing now is similar to conflicts that he's seen in the past that got way out of hand and a lot of people died in for no reason. So, I mean, that's the perspective he's coming from. He's also coming from the perspective of having worked within the Trump administration, having supported strikes very much like this in the past, and working directly under Tulsi Gabbard, who, although has spent a lifetime talking about not going to war with Iran and pretty clearly being a grifter, making this pivot to working underneath Trump now to seemingly just completely get the door shut on her or completely have to sell herself out and her lifelong crusade against going to war with Iran to all of a sudden kind of plead the fifth in front of Congress for what? To stay in the administration because she's doing such important work? I don't know. It's all a little fishy. It seems to me like Tulsi Gabbard was in on conversations with this guy about quitting over this, whether it was to make some kind of public kerfuffle or because they genuinely wanted to make a stand about the Iran war. I don't know, but it seems like she's connected to this, obviously. And then he makes this pivot into talking about Thomas Crooks and talking about Charlie Kirk and the shootings that happened. And so that's where, to me, it gets interesting, and I think it's a little more clear what his angle is and why he's doing that. So he's essentially saying that he thinks part of the way that Israel might have been able to convince Trump to do this, outside of like blackmail or something, is by convincing him that people like Thomas Crooks or other attempts on his life were, Iranian plots to get him killed. And so he's gesturing at Thomas Crooks and the complete void of information that we have about that, as well as the void of anybody in government, including Trump, ever talking about that, which is really weird, considering what an iconic moment it was during the election. And he's also saying that there was another guy who got arrested 2 days before that, who was tied to Iran, who had some plot to kill an unnamed politician. But, given the fact that that was 2 days before Thomas Crooks tried to kill Trump, it seems like there might be something weird going on there. Now, what Kent is saying is that we don't know anything about Thomas Crooks, and if there was more that he had going on, if he had social media accounts or anything like that, and it seems like the government is resistant to looking into that. So I would believe that there's talk behind the scenes about the fact that Iran tried to get him killed. I have no idea how you would connect that to Thomas Crooks. The only way that I could see is potentially he was interacting with people online that might have radicalized him or something. That's something that happens. Even this guy who got arrested 2 days before Thomas Crooks, the person that he told his plan to, who was a friend of his, was recording him, and the two people that he hired to carry out this plan of his to kill, like I said, an unnamed politician, and also this was a dude who had some kind of connection to Iran, like he was carrying this out, trying to figure out how to carry something out in their favor, maybe for some money, and in the process completely got encircled by these FBI agents and caught. So there is a history of FBI agents and like unnamed entities getting involved with shooters and kind of pushing them over the edge behind the scenes. The problem with that is that if there's no proof of it, it's the kind of thing you could attribute to any shooting that ever happens. Now, Thomas Crooks is specifically different from these other shootings that we've seen, even Tyler Robinson, because we know nothing about him. And it is true that Trump completely shut up about that, which is so uncharacteristic of him. And so it does, I would believe that there's more information there that we don't know, and it definitely could take the shape of somebody who was interacting with Thomas Crooks before that attempt actually happened. But I also think that this guy is doing this conspiracy thing on purpose, and he's tying it to Charlie Kirk on purpose. And so while I do think that he's trying to make an appeal to Trump and he's trying to flatter him and hoping that Trump will like stop this war, I also think that this is a grift on his part. And I think that's why he invokes Charlie Kirk and goes about this thing about saying Charlie Kirk would have opposed this war in Iran. I don't believe that. That's getting headlines everywhere. And to me, that is just the most cynical thing. Now, it's possible that there were some moments where Charlie Kirk was opposing, certain strikes in Iran or something. But in general, that was always what he was in favor of. I in no way see Charlie Kirk as opposing the type of interventionism that Trump is going about. And even like he says here, eventually, even if he might weakly oppose something behind the scenes, he's always going to back Trump. If Charlie Kirk was alive, he most definitely would be out here loudly backing the Iran war. And so I think this guy is trying to appeal to the people who want to believe that Charlie Kirk would be saying exactly what they feel about this. But the truth is he would be doing what he did on the Epstein files, which is trying to pull people's attention away from it. And then only if he got enough backlash from his audience would he reroute and start talking about something that is politically inconvenient for Trump. That was the behavior of Charlie Kirk. To ascribe anything else to him is totally dishonest. And I think the reason he's trying to tie it to these shootings, aside from the fact that there might genuinely be some suspicions that he had behind the scenes about that sort of thing, I can see it. It's certainly juicy, it's certainly interesting, and I believe that some of these shootings might have weirder underlying elements to them than the mainstream media knows about or talks about. I would believe that. It's the kind of thing that I struggle to internalize without some real evidence. But I also think that after Charlie Kirk was killed and Candace Owens went out there and started talking about Israel, I think that was a super revealing moment in so many ways. One thing that it showed me, and I talked about this at the time, Candace Owens completely diverted the narrative about Charlie Kirk's killing and turned it into something that the right still has not recovered from, really, in terms of their ability to be unified in the response to the murder of Charlie Kirk. They created this whole narrative about the trans roommate and the trans ideology and trans this and that and written on the bullets and blah, blah, blah. And people had bought that. The train was on the rails. And if it wasn't for Candace Owens coming out and creating out of thin air connections to Israel that never were substantiated, never meant anything, I don't think there's been a single piece of evidence that she has ever produced that would show that anything weird happened with Tyler Robinson related to Israel or anything like that. It's purely speculation. It's always been purely speculation. But what it did was it completely diluted the narrative and the momentum of this idea that they're going to go after trans people. And they're still doing that, by the way. I'm not saying they're not. But in terms of having the public on board and the MAGA base on board with that, Candace ruined that. Not just distracted them, but actually killed their enthusiasm for the narrative that MAGA was giving them. And it might even be one of the first times that a lot of people started to question the MAGA narrative, really. And the Epstein momentum and stuff only built after that, if you ask me. It kind of, the ripples of it started before. But I think that was a major crack in people's trust in the administration. In Kash Patel, people were not trusting what Kash Patel was saying around that time. And they would have went along with it if it wasn't for Candace Owens coming and saying, oh, here's a much more interesting story. So I think this guy's kind of doing the same thing. I think what this dude and maybe people like him learned is that not only can you kind of control and dilute the narrative by throwing conspiracies in there that are what people want to hear, because we know the right doesn't have a high standard for what they view to be a conspiracy they want to dig into or believe. But also, you can gain a lot of popularity and gain a lot of momentum. I think this guy is speaking directly to an audience. And like I said, he's run for office before. I think that he likely will do it again, or he's going to do some kind of podcast or something. He's going to keep being out there. And I think this anti-war posture is the only smart thing for any MAGA Trump politician to be doing right now, because this is going to turn into a much larger conflict if there's not an immediate fix for it. If Trump doesn't listen to people like this right away and change course, which I don't think he's going to do, this is going to become some form of a long-term thing. And so posturing against that is kind of the only thing that anybody in this coalition can do if they want to succeed the current iteration of right-wing politics. So that's what I think this guy's doing. I think there might be an element of conscience to it. Like, I don't want to be in an administration that's doing this. I don't really just buy this gullibility, this affability. We know Trump is a smart guy. How could he let this happen? I mean, you said before, if we want regime change, we probably shouldn't kill the fucking guy who is actually going to be able to facilitate some moderate policy in the country. And so that doesn't sound like a very smart thing to do, if you ask me. It doesn't sound like smart people are at the table. So I don't know. I think what this guy's trying to do in terms of reaching Trump is hopeless. That's not going to happen, because if you can't even reach him from inside his own administration, maybe something will strike across his desk. But if you think you're going to pull him in a different direction versus whatever the influence campaigns and arm twisting that is going on behind the scenes that he has fully submitted to, I mean, he knows that's not going to go anywhere, which is why I think he's trying to build an audience. He's trying to build his own political momentum with this, I think.
Trying to break through and cut through the noise and give something that's actually food for thought. Feels a little bit useless. Hundreds of millions of views on things that are rotting people's brains and reactionary narratives twisting the news.